Good afternoon, everyone. Final session of the morning. And mine's very much going to be quite a practical session. So really a guide, what can you be doing now, getting ready for your year-end audit to make that year-end audit process as smooth as possible, firstly for you, but then also hopefully for us as well. So what I'm going to cover, four main areas. So some things you can be doing as kind of a pre-audit health check, what you can be doing to make sure that your finances are in good order before we then start looking at them. Also going to go over some common NLPs, so management letter points. So some of the things that we picked up last year during our work that fed into our audit findings report, and some of those things, sharing them as a wider group to try and avoid them and limit the numbers that we're going to be picking up during this year. Then going to go through some of the audit information requests. So those who have been clients and were clients last year, you'll know Inflow. It's the system that we use to transfer the documents. So I'm going to go through that, some of the changes we've got, a few new templates, and then just a general sort of inflow tips to make sure that it works effectively for both of us. And then kind of a final, what can you expect from us? How are we going to support you through this year's audit process? If you've got any queries or questions, what are the touch points? And how can we just, again, make sure it's a good experience for you? So in terms of a pre-audit health check, a lot of the things I'm going on here, I'm hoping are not sort of new or surprises or groundbreaking. Hopefully lots of these things are being done already. I find it useful just to go through. These are often some of the things that we see for the audits that perhaps don't go quite so well. It's because these things haven't been done or checked by you before it's come through to us. But the first thing we say is to kind of pre-audit your trial balance. Obviously the trial balance is the summary of all your transactions during the year and your assets and liabilities. So what can you do looking through that trial balance to make sure it is in a good position before the audit? The first thing we always say, and it's kind of the first thing that we do when we get that trial balance, is check the opening balances. So where you've got your brought forward reserves, do those figures on your trial balance match to what's in last year's final signed accounts. The earlier that can be done, the better. If you go through and check them and find out they don't agree to the accounts, then we can start having a look and see what's been included within there. Could it be that there were some final audit adjustments last year that you just need to journal in which case reach out to us, talk to us, we can have a look at those. And then making sure that you haven't posted anything to those reserve codes during the current year that could potentially be a reason for that opening difference. Then a really good check is just to work down your control accounts. So anything that's sat in that balance sheet where you've got a value at the 31st of August, do you know what the breakdown of that figure is? Things like bank reconciliations that I'm hoping you'll be doing throughout the year, particularly that August one that we're going to be auditing, check that works. Where you've got any payroll control accounts, so if there's any HMRC, PAYE, NI, anything within those, there is a balance at the year end because you're not paying that final month until after the year end's passed. Then make sure that does agree back to that August payroll. Any VAT balances, really useful session there from Helen, but when you go through, whether you're VAT 126 or VAT registered, again, that year-end debtor balance, if you're net reclaiming VAT, which the majority will be, does that agree through to any outstanding claims, and does it then match those remittances that you're receiving after that period? Debtor creditor ledgers, something that we come on to a bit later on, but that's just having a look through your supplier ledger, your creditor ledger at that point, doing a bit of a health check. Are there any old balances within there? So things that may need writing off, may need providing against, depending on how old they are and what they relate to. But also where you've got any sort of opposite transactions within there. So if you've got a debtor's ledger, but you've got some credit balances on there, which you wouldn't expect to see, understanding what they are. Are you missing an invoice? Is it something that, again, if it's quite historical, can it be written off? Just to tidy that up and make sure that it is a nice tidy ledger. And then prepayments and accruals. So this is one which we pick up quite a lot during the audit. Where you've got your trial balance value at the end of the year for either prepayments or accruals. Do you have a list of those prepayments and accruals that matches back to that balance? Particularly those that are doing prepayments and accruals on a monthly basis as part of your month management accounts. You'll have lots of reversing journals throughout the year, so a really good check just to have a look at that 31st of August position, just to make sure that they are complete and you know everything that's within those. One of the larger sections, and again, something that we do tend to pick up quite a few points on during audits, is around the fixed asset register. So a really large balance within the accounts, very material, particularly the land and buildings element of it. But a few hints and tips here, things that you can do. Have a look at that fixed asset register that you've got, making sure it agrees to the trial balance, just to make sure that it is a smooth process. So ultimately, does that fixed asset register agree to the figures in the trial balance? So looking at a cost basis and the depreciation basis, and ultimately the net book value, one minus the other, do they all match up? And also where you've got the opening balances, again, just doing that check with the opening balances against last year's accounts, do they match up? Reviewing any capital additions that you've had during the year. So where you have spent, had capital items, bearing in mind your own accounting policy of what level of asset threshold you have to hit before you do capitalise. So have you anything that you have capitalised and journaled within your account system, is that added to your fixed asset register? And also worth doing a review of some of your codes that you've got, your revenue codes that may include capital items, like if you've got any repairs or maintenance during the year, any IT spend. If that does meet that threshold for capitalisation, have you treated it accordingly? Depreciation, so making sure that depreciation rates that you're actually using, are they in line with the policy that you've got in your accounts? And then has that been calculated and journaled? And again, doing the first check, does that depreciation match between the trial balance and the fixed asset register, just to make sure it's all included? And then a consideration about any fixed asset disposals. So have you sold any assets during the year? If so, have they then been removed from the fixed asset register? And also thinking about whether any additions that you've had during the year, has that resulted in a disposal? So if you have had to sort of kit out a new IT suite, for example, what's happened with the old IT equipment? If it's been scrapped or sold, then have you removed that from the fixed asset register? Worth doing a review of that fixed asset register for any old assets. So anything that's fully depreciated, just having a view of, are we still using those assets? In which case, they can stay on the fixed asset register. But if it's something that you're no longer using, has been scrapped, then remove those, just to keep that fixed asset register tidy and manageable as you go through year to year. So that sort of goes through all the main balance sheet items. Some of the things you can check on your trial balance from a revenue point of view. The main funding streams, particularly the material ones, the larger ones. So if you look at your trial balance, a lot of them, the gag will just be one single line. Does that match up to your funding letter for the year? Is it in line with what you're expecting? With the gag, if it doesn't match, it normally means one particular month's been posted somewhere else. So quite easy to identify the issue. But these are all the checks that we'll be doing, and if you've already done them, then it means there'll be fewer queries from us as auditors and make it a nice, efficient audit. The capital funding, depending on the size of the trust, different capital fundings, and also whether you've got any sort of SIF bids in action this year. But going through each of those on a trial balance level, making sure it's in accordance with your expectations. So your DFC income, so the energy efficiency capital income you've had this year, you've had that now. So does that TB balance agree to what you've received? The condition improvement fund, so the SIF, have you had any applications this year? Have you been successful with any grants? And if so, have you then accrued the full amount of that SIF income within your trial balance? Obviously at the end of August, even if you haven't received it yet, which you won't have done, still need to accrue all of that income and recognise it within the accounts, so making sure that's been completed. And also worth any SIF projects that you've had from perhaps the previous year or the year before that have been ongoing, have they now been completed? Was there any sort of underspend in any of those budgets, potential repayments of any of that SIF bid? Just making sure you've got a good control over that whole SIF project. Here I'm talking about the income side of it, but from the expenditure side as well, which I'll come on to a bit later. Other things you can be doing now, so getting those key dates in diaries. So the dates of when we're ultimately aiming to present the audit findings, present the accounts to your audit or finance committee, but then also that full board meeting when the accounts are going to be signed off, formally approved. Audit planning and completion meetings, so these are the meetings with us. I know a lot of the audit planning meetings will have taken place. If you've had those, I've got a few more over the next couple of weeks. Making sure those planning meetings are in the date, and then the completion meetings are very much fitting in with that schedule of when those final finance committee and full board meetings are, so there's plenty of time to get any outstanding items cleared. And then the actual audit fieldwork dates, the dates we're doing the work. Do you know when they are? Are they in the diaries? Are you going to be available during that week for those queries? Are you going to get all the information we need to us before then, in line with inflow? So making sure just so there's a clear understanding of when the audit's taking place and what those end dates need to be. As Andy mentioned earlier, for the majority of the trust, we do prepare those statutory accounts for you. But if you're one of the ones that prepare your own, then you can roll forward those accounts and get the templates set up ready for this year. Andy went through the accounts direction, nothing too significant, particularly from the numbers side for this year, which is really good news. But making sure that you've got that latest version of those Coketown model accounts to compare them against. And then the trustees report, as Andy again mentioned earlier, have you started on it? Is it in progress? Some useful guidance out there. The accounts direction, Coketown do have them. But what we've produced this year, and what we've produced in previous years as well, is a trustee report guide. So it takes the guidance from the accounts direction, puts our own sort of slant on it, our opinion, a bit more guidance about what you should be including under each headers. And that's been included in the inflow site that's been set up. So under the trustee report request, that guide is within there. And similar to the sort of boilerplating point that was made earlier, the ESFA don't want to see sort of references to Coketown within the trustees report. Don't want those boilerplates, but also with us, when we read it, we've written our trustee report guide. So if there's boilerplate wording taken directly from that as well, we'll know. So please do tailor it to your own trust and make sure it is relevant for what you're doing. And then, you'll know lots of governance information within those financial statements. So certain things can start to be pulled together. So who are your members, who are your governors, any appointments, resignations during the year, if you've got the list of those. Any updates in your professional advisors, make sure you've got names and addresses and things, including the accounts. The governance statements in the accounts where you're listing all the meeting attendance for the full board, and then any audit committee, any other finance committees. Have you got that information available? Or is this something you need to speak to your clerk to get that information? Value for money statement, again, Andy discussed the content of that and the changes this year, but is that something that's started to be drafted? And then the internal assurance, so have you had internal assurance done during the year, collating those reports, having them already, so it's something that we'll be requesting as part of the audit. Something you can be doing now, so I think probably a bit like the audit opinions on the accounts, 99.5% of the inflows are now up and out for you all. So have an early sight of those, make sure you can access inflow, have a look through those requests. Very similar to the requests that we've had in previous years, so the accounts direction hasn't changed too much. Little bit changes in auditing standards. There's a couple new ISAs this year in National Standards of Auditing, so there's a few extra questions within there, which I'll come on to a bit later on. But have a review of that. Are you familiar with the terms, what we're asking for? If you're not, then please get in touch as soon as possible and we can help you talk you through those. Start uploading the information now. If there's anything like board minutes, perhaps those internal assurance reports, anything that you can tick off early, just means when you do then come down to the detail and putting in the numbers, there's sort of fewer things to go with. And then also thinking if there's anything on there that perhaps isn't the immediate people who are invited to introduce job to collate. So declarations of interest, if you need to involve the clerk to pull together those items. LGPS valuations, hopefully your actuaries, your schemes have been in touch and asked whether you want one for this year. So if not, get in touch with them. So obviously need this valuation for the year end, make sure it's in progress. And then the final one, particularly where there are any new stalls, any new joiners during the year where you need any valuations for the land and buildings, making sure that they're aware of when you need those by, just so we're not waiting for them at the end of the process and it's holding up the final sign-off. Going concern, again, it's been discussed by a few people this morning, but making sure that sort of considered hopefully all done your budget forecast returns for the next 3 years, so having the information for them that's available, where there is sort of key assumptions underpinning those budgets that you prepared. If they're available as kind of a summary document, fantastic. If not, then be prepared during the audit that we're going to be asking questions about these assumptions and the key ones that you've made, just to make sure they're in line with our understanding of the sector and expectations and what we're seeing. So that was it from a pre-audit health check. So hopefully nothing groundbreaking or anything you think, oh no, I didn't think of doing that, but useful as a good reminder. Now we're going to run through some of our sort of common NLPs or things that we saw more often last year, any patterns that we had. Andy went through some of the key findings from the ESFA on the sort of audit and regularity reports, and our understanding of the sector overall. They do also have some sort of stats around NLPs and how many there are, and The average number of NLPs across all of the trusts last year was just under 3. So where you've got somewhere you've got sort of NLPs, don't think it means you're doing things wrong, you're not in line with everyone else in the sector. And that kind of sector-wide is very similar to what we've got internally. It's sort of around that 3 mark that we tend to have. We grade them red, amber and green, so red being something really significant, potentially impact that audit opinion, a real concern, down to green, which very much just best housekeeping points, and then amber sits somewhere between the two. And then the blue is for any points we've raised in previous years, we'll revisit during this year's audit, and then if they've been resolved and they're no longer an issue, then they fall into that category. But in terms of some of the common ones that we saw last year, so fixed asset registers, so I went through earlier, so just fixed asset register not being kept up to date, not agreeing to the trial balance, not all of the capital additions are added on there. But if you do that earlier test, then hopefully that won't be a problem. Declarations of interest is quite a common one that we had last year, so this is either the board of trustees or the senior management team either not completing the forms, and so when we asked them at the year end, they just weren't completed, weren't available. But more common was the sort of the undeclared interests. So these forms have been completed. As part of the audit, we do quite a standard check where we'll look at companies' house records, charity commission records to see if there are any other interests that these trustees or senior management may have that haven't been disclosed on the form. And then if we find any that aren't, we then raise that as a management letter point because that register isn't complete. So a check that you could do internally once you get those forms back. So first of all, make sure that you do get all the forms back, and then just making sure that they are complete. Point I mentioned earlier around particularly those debtors and creditor ledgers. Have you got any ones that are the wrong way? So credits on that debtor ledger, where you have got them identifying what they are. Do they need a journal? Do they need correcting? And also if you've got any older balances. So we say anything really over sort of 3 months old. If you've got a debtor balance that hasn't been paid in 3 months, we'll be asking what the status of that is. Why hasn't it been paid? Are they being chased? Do you still consider it to be a good debt, recoverable? Similarly on the creditor side, if you've got something old on there that you haven't paid, what are the reasons for you not having paid it? Are you going to be paying it? Employment records, another one fairly common. So when we're doing our payroll testing, we agree back to employment records, making sure the gross pay agrees back and verifying the existence of that employee. Have you got the documents on file that you should have from a regulatory point of view? So often those employment contracts are not available. It was more of an issue many years ago when sort of trusts were first converting from the local authority and trying to get hold of those contracts was an issue. Normally when the Academy Trusts are issuing contracts for new staff since that date, tend to be done generally well across all of our client base, but particularly those older ones. And also where there's been any staff pay changes, any pay awards, any changes in position, just having some sort of documentation to confirm that rate so we can agree it through to the gross wage that's being paid. Related party transactions, spoke about that earlier as well. Very common management letter point, so transactions either not being reported to the SFA where you've had any during the year, and then not getting that prior approval where you went over that 20,000 limit as it has been going backwards, be 40,000 going forward as Andy mentioned, but making sure that you have got all of those transactions identified. And then a point on capital funds. This was more for our larger multi-academy trust clients that had multiple schools, multiple SIF bids, some of them up to sort of 15, 20 SIF bids going on at any one time in projects, and just getting a good control over that. So a really good process of identifying how much income you've got, how much is still to come in, how much you've spent, how much is still to be spent, and particularly how that feeds into that restricted fixed asset balance and the carry forward within the capital side. So making sure you've got a good understanding of that capital, you've got the right accruals and deferreds within your accounts around those. And that was it on the MLPs. So if you've covered all of those, they're the things we commonly find. If you've ticked all that off, we'll have to find something else this year that we can find, because we like to find something. So now I'm going to touch very briefly on inflow. So anyone who's been a client for the last few years will hopefully be very, very well versed with inflow and hopefully agree with us that we think it's a great tool. So they have all gone live now. Just a reminder, this is kind of what the first page looks like when you log into the inflow system. So this is the page that we see. So things like draft and prepared that we've got here, you won't see those. That's us creating the deliverables. And then once we set them to you, you then sort of see the final 4 columns. And the idea is, at the start of the audit, they're all in that submitted column. By the end of the audit, we want them all green, all in that complete section. You get a section that sort of tells you when they're due, so you can quite quickly see which ones are sort of, you've got a couple of weeks to pull them together, which ones are falling due within the next few days, and then which ones are overdue, but we don't want any in that final column. Hopefully they'll all be in the top ones. And just a reminder, to get to the actual requests themselves, you can click on any of these bars. You click on submitted, it will take you to all the ones that you haven't yet opened, that you haven't yet looked at. You can click on the due date columns when they're on there, and again it will filter them by that category. Or you can click on the little module selection where it says collaborate. If you click on there, it will then take you to the full list. So if you click on collaborate like this, it changes to this next screen. Important differentiation when you get here is, again, up in that top corner, you've got the planning and the field work. So we've split them between planning, which are sort of the initial requests that we want, the information that we need to be able to do our planning process. And when we're talking to you about the dates of the audit, we'll tell you when that planning work's going to be done. And then the field work is then the larger quantity of requests, which is the things we need before we get into the actual sort of meat of the audit and the actual testing. But the usual format, sort of the list of headings of the requests that we've got. The status matches to the lovely colourful graphs that we've got, so whether it's been submitted, if you've opened it, if you've then completed it and sent it back, it says received, and then once we're happy with it, we mark it complete. The two initials that we have, the first one is the member of the Cooper Parry team who's created that request and who's asking for the information, and the second one is the person from your team who will be providing that information. A lot of them might just be a single person that's responsible for all of them, but we can then split those so the relevant person, depending on the section of it, someone doing the payroll records may be a different individual, but that can be changed by either us or you, so you can then allocate them to the relevant people in the organisation, and they can then filter it so they can only see the requests that are relevant to them, which is very useful. And then the really important one is that final column. So this is the date that we've requested the information for. So the planning ones have got an earlier date that fits in with when we're booked in to do that work, and the field work will have a date that fits in with the field work time. But really important to try and get all that information to us for that date. If there's any reason that you can't or you're struggling to hit that, then please have a really early conversation with us. The sooner the better, so we can have a good look at resourcing and any changes to the timetable that may need to happen. So this is the initial planning information. It does go a bit further down. And then the next one is in the field work. The field work, same format as in previous years. It's split by individual area of the file and then the requests that fall within it. But not going to go through all the detail of those with you now. Some of the new things this year, there's a few more questionnaires, particularly those two revised ISAs that I mentioned. We've got one on fraud and one around risk assessment. So the top two questionnaires will be new to you this year. I think those who have had planning meetings would have talked you through the changes and the actual detail of those, but they'll need completing and they form part of the planning work. And then we've got two questionnaires that form part of the field work, one around related parties and how those are controlled. And then our usual accounting officer regularity questionnaire for the accounting officer to complete and sign off. As Andy mentioned, there's a couple of new questions around the estate strategy and management this year, just to cover that new item in the regularity statement. Got a few templates that we've included, and what we always say with the templates is that these are more for your use if you want to use them. The Trust Your Report Guide I talked about, but this year we've put in quite a few payroll templates within there, just to fit in with the disclosures that are within the payroll section of the accounts. I mean, you may have your own wages reconciliation template, your own template for calculating staff numbers for the year. By all means use them. We're not saying you have to use these, but if you do want a sort of a structured template that you can populate, then by all means please do use them. And the same for the AAR. The deliverable dates for those are a little bit later, so we tend to worry about them in November, December time once we've got the audits out of the way. But again, there's templates in there for that additional information, so please feel free to use them if they'll be helpful. So the final part from me is what can you expect from us? I want to point out in here, we're the ones at the top of the mountain, so we're hoping to pull you up to get your audit done, not pulling you down. So really want to support you, and what can we do to help you to be able to provide all that information and make the audit, dare I say, enjoyable experience, but at least an efficient experience. So some key touch points that you're going to have or have already had. So audit planning meetings. So going through what's happened during the year, we can talk to you about those audit approach, audit developments, agree the timetables. Hopefully, as I say, the majority of them have happened, some are still to happen. After that, you'll then get an audit planning report, which is a key document that summarises everything that we've then agreed. So what we see as those key audit risk areas, what work we're going to undertake around those, confirming that timetable, introducing you to the senior members of the team, so you've got their contact details throughout the audit. Trustees report guidance we provided. So there's a really big section of the accounts. It does take a lot of input to pull it together. So we guide to help you with that. And then the audit deliverables within Inflow. So where we've added those extra templates, support. We've also changed a lot of the narrative. Had some feedback in previous years that some of the narrative was not sure certain terminology was different. We're not sure exactly what it was that we want. So we've developed that this year. So hopefully when you're working through those, it's quite clear what it is that we're actually asking for when you work through those. So if you have any questions when you're sort of going through Inflow or getting ready for that year end or ahead of the audit, many ways you can contact us, talk to us during those audit planning meetings. It's a great opportunity, sort of one-to-one to go through anything that you want to discuss. At any time, contact us, you can ring us, you can email us, you can Teams call us, you can pop in if you're passing by the office, now you know where it is. So do come in and say hello. If there is anything, the earlier the better. So don't wait until the audit starts, or you have to wait for the audit planning meeting, if it's say in a couple of weeks' time. Please do reach out to us, particularly if there are things when you're going through that pre-audit health check, like opening balances or control accounts, anything that we can support with or help with, then please do let us know. And so there's no silly questions. Me and Andy have both been working in the education sector since it started, sort of around the 2010, 2011 time, and we've probably heard every single question or query, or as we've gone along. We've worked with brand new converter trusts that had no idea what a trial balance or a fixed asset register was, let alone anything else. So no silly questions, please do ask. We might be able to resolve it in a couple of minutes on the phone, whereas you may need to do your own research to find out what it is. So please do use us where you can. And that was it from me. So hopefully nothing new, hopefully all sort of common sense stuff really, but again, anything we can help with, you know where we are.